Level 1. The invisible ceiling. Your grandmother kept cash in a coffee can. Not because she didn't trust banks. She did. She just didn't trust herself to not spend it if it lived somewhere she couldn't see it. A Maxwell House tin, red lid, pushed to the back of the cabinet above the refrigerator. Emergency money, always there, never growing, never moving. Just sitting in the dark, waiting for something bad to happen. That image is your entire financial education. Nobody sat you down and said we are poor. Nobody handed you a book called Here's Why You'll Struggle with Money Your Whole Life. It was quieter than that. It was the way your mother's jaw tightened when the car made a noise it didn't make yesterday. The way your father changed the subject when someone mentioned retirement. The way every conversation about the future eventually hit a wall, an invisible one, made of nothing but habit and history and the unspoken belief that people like you don't end up with more than people like you started with. You absorbed it the way children absorb everything, completely, without knowing you were doing it. Money was a source of shame before you were old enough to understand what money was. You didn't get the school trip permission slip signed because the fee was $12 and it was the wrong week. You wore the same 3 shirts on rotation and got very good at pretending that was a choice. You learned not to ask for things, not because your parents were cruel, because the look on their face when you asked was worse than not having the thing. That look taught you more than any classroom ever did. It taught you that wanting more was dangerous, that ambition was something other people had, that the correct posture for someone in your position was gratitude for what you had, not hunger for what you didn't. And for a long time, you believed that. The ceiling was invisible because nobody ever pointed at it. Nobody had to. You just kept growing until you hit it, and then you stopped growing, because that's what everyone around you had done. That's what you were supposed to do. But something was wrong. You could feel it before you could name it. This low-grade static in your chest that wouldn't go away. A sense that the map you'd been handed didn't match the terrain you were standing on. That the rules you'd been taught were real, just not for everyone. And then one day, something cracked. Level 2. The first crack. You're 17. Maybe 22. The age doesn't matter, the moment does. You're sitting somewhere unremarkable. A break room. A bus. Your childhood bedroom at midnight with a laptop screen lighting your face. And you read something, or see something, or meet someone, and a single thought enters your mind with the quiet force of a crowbar. These people didn't start with more than me. They just decided the ceiling wasn't real. That thought is either the best thing that ever happens to you, or the beginning of a very long, very difficult decade. Probably both. Here's what nobody tells you about the moment you decide to opt out of the script you were handed. It doesn't feel like empowerment. It doesn't feel like a montage. It feels like vertigo. Like you've stepped off a ledge, and you don't know yet if there's ground below you or just more air. You start reading. Obsessively. Quietly. You don't tell anyone because you already know how it lands. Your cousin tried to start a business 2 years ago, and everyone called him delusional until he quit, and then they called him smart for quitting. Your circle has a very efficient immune system. It identifies ambition as a foreign body and attacks. So you stay quiet. You read at night. You watch videos in headphones. You fill a notebook with ideas that feel simultaneously obvious and impossible. You are building a private world inside your head, and the gap between that world and the one you actually live in is starting to make everything feel slightly unreal. You try your first thing. Maybe it fails in a week. Maybe it limps along for 6 months before dying quietly. It doesn't matter. What matters is you tried, which means you've already separated yourself from 90% of the people who will spend their entire lives saying, I should have, and I had this idea once. But separation has a price. You haven't paid it yet. The invoice is coming. Level 3. The grind nobody posts about. 2 years in. Maybe 3. Your bank account does not reflect the hours you've put in. This is the part of the story that gets skipped in every highlight reel, every how I made my first million video, every LinkedIn post from someone who figured it out and now sells courses about figuring it out. They skip this part because this part is ugly and slow and doesn't convert well. This part is you, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, doing something for the 100th time that still isn't working, while everyone around you has a normal life that is starting to look If not glamorous, at least restful. Your friends stop inviting you out. Not maliciously, they just stopped expecting you to say yes, and then they stopped asking. You told yourself that's fine. That sacrifice is the price of the goal. And it is. But sacrifice still costs something, even when you choose it. Your family starts asking questions with an edge in them. When is this going to turn into something real? Not because they want you to fail, they genuinely don't, but because they're scared for you. And scared people get impatient. Your mother asks if you need money. The fact that she's offering money she doesn't have makes it worse, not better. You take a loss. Not a small one. Maybe you put months of savings into something and it doesn't work and you have to sit with that number, that specific, humiliating number, and figure out what it means about you. You don't sleep well for a week. You have a moment, one specific, 3 a.m. moment where the whole project seems not just difficult but genuinely stupid. Where the voice that sounds exactly like every person who ever doubted you gets very loud and very reasonable. It says, "Nobody from where you're from has done this. That's not a coincidence. That's data." You sit with that for a while. Then you get up, not because you're made of something special, not because you have a mindset that other people lack. You get up because the alternative is going back, and you've spent enough time at the starting line to know you can't live there. The version of you that just accepts the ceiling, that version of you doesn't exist anymore. You burned the floor on that side. So you keep going. But things are different now. You are a little harder than you used to be, a little quieter. There are conversations you used to have with people you love that you simply don't have anymore, not because you've grown apart, but because the distance between what's in your head and what they'd understand has become too wide to bridge in a single dinner. That loneliness is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, quietly, like sediment. Something is working, though. You can feel it before you can see it. Level 4. The first sign. It's not the million. It's not even close to the million. But it's real, and it's yours, and nothing that came before it prepared you for how it would feel. Maybe it's the first month your side income matches your rent. Maybe it's the first time a stranger pays you for something you made. Maybe it's a number in your account that, 2 years ago, would have seemed like a typo. Whatever it is, it's specific, and it arrives on an ordinary Tuesday, and you stare at it for longer than makes sense. Then you close the laptop and go to bed. Because there's no one to call. That's the thing about the first real win when you've been doing this alone. The person you most want to tell is someone who wouldn't understand what the number means. Not because they're unintelligent, because they don't have the context. They haven't been inside the days that produce this. Explaining it would require explaining everything, and you don't have the energy for everything tonight. So you sit with it quietly. You let it be real. You go to sleep. What changes? You believe, for the first time in a way that isn't just performance, that the ceiling is breakable. Before you knew it intellectually, now you know it in your body. That's different. That's the difference between reading about altitude and actually breathing thin air. What gets worse? The stakes. Because now it's real, which means now it can be lost, which means the fear changes shape. Before, you were afraid it would never work. Now you're afraid it will work, and then stop. You become protective in a way that borders on paranoia. You don't talk about it. You don't post about it. You don't want anyone's energy near it until it's solid enough to withstand being seen. You reinvest everything. You stay uncomfortable on purpose, because comfort is where momentum goes to die. You've learned that now, the hard way. The first win is proof. It's not a rival. It's confirmation that the direction is right, and that's all it needs to be. Keep going. Level 5. The crossing. The number becomes real on a Wednesday. Not a dramatic Wednesday. Not a Wednesday with a soundtrack. You're sitting somewhere ordinary, your car, your kitchen table, a desk that costs too much because you finally let yourself buy a real desk, and you run the numbers the way you've run them 100 times before. And this time they clear. 7 figures. The first time that number applies to you, to your name, to the account with your social security number attached to it. You check it twice. You close it. You open it again. You close it. You thought this moment would feel like a finish line, like the specific release of a breath you've been holding for years. You thought there would be something, some physical sensation, Some signal from your nervous system that said, this is the one, this is the moment, you did it. Instead, it's quiet. That's the part nobody warns you about. The profound, disorienting quiet of crossing a threshold that nobody in your bloodline has ever crossed. There's no reference for this in your family's vocabulary. Your parents don't have a word for what you just became. The emotional language for this milestone does not exist in the house you grew up in, and so you sit in the silence of it like a man standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed. You want to call your mother? You dial? You talk for 20 minutes? You don't mention the number? Not because you're hiding it, because you don't know how to say it without it sounding like something it isn't, like bragging, like separation, like you standing on one side of a river, and her standing on the other, and you not knowing if telling her helps or just makes the water louder. So you say you're doing well. She says that's good. She says eat something real, not just whatever's fast. You hang up and sit in the quiet for a long time. Here's what the money does immediately. It solves the problems you've had for years and reveals an entirely new set of problems you didn't know existed. You have decisions to make that require knowledge you don't have. Tax structures, asset protection, investment vehicles. You grew up in a house with a coffee can above the refrigerator. Nobody left you a manual for this. You start to realize that becoming a millionaire is not the end of the financial education. It's the beginning of a harder one. And you start to realize something else, something that settles in slowly over the weeks after the crossing. You are not the same person you were before, but you're still from the same place. And those two things are going to have to learn to live inside you at the same time. That tension is going to cost you more than the grind did. Level 6. The gap. You go home for the holidays. It's the same house. Same smell, something that's always been in the walls. Something you stopped noticing when you lived there, and now notice immediately when you step through the door. Same too loud television. Same table that's slightly uneven and gets a folded napkin under one leg. Same everything. And yet, there's a gap now. Not between you and the people in this house. You love them with the same intensity you always have, maybe more, because distance clarifies things. The gap is between the life you left and the life you're living, and you can feel it the way you can feel a change in air pressure. Nobody talks about it. Nobody has to. You pay for dinner. You say it's nothing. They say you didn't have to. You say you wanted to. There's a micro silence after that exchange that lasts exactly long enough to be uncomfortable, and then everyone moves on, and nobody mentions it again. But it happened. You start losing people who aren't leaving. That's the strange thing. Nobody dramatically exits your life. No confrontation. No falling out. Just a gradual drift, like two boats that were once tied together and someone's quietly, incrementally letting out the rope. By the time you notice how far apart you've drifted, the shore where you started is just a shape in the distance. Old friends start to treat you differently. Some become quieter around you in a way that feels like self-consciousness. Some become louder, testing, probing, looking for the version of you that would prove you haven't changed, and when they can't find him, they don't know what to do with the one they found instead. One friend, one you've known since childhood, makes a comment at a dinner that lands wrong. Something that sounds like a joke but carries the full weight of resentment underneath it. You don't address it. He doesn't apologize. You both pretend the moment passed cleanly. You don't call each other as often after that. You also start losing people who are leaving. Relationships that couldn't survive the version of you that stopped shrinking. A partnership that made sense when you were both at the same altitude and started to buckle once you weren't. People who loved the version of you that needed saving and didn't know how to love the version that didn't. You grieve these losses quietly, because you don't have the language for them. You can't post about them. You can't explain, without sounding cruel or arrogant, that success can be isolating in the same specific way to failure is, that both leave you sitting alone in a room, wondering if anyone sees you clearly. And then there's the guilt. The guilt is the one nobody talks about, not the abstract guilt of having something more specific and harder to shake. The guilt of watching your mother still worry about money when you could write a check that would end that worry forever, and not knowing how to do it without changing something irreversible between you. The guilt of growing up. The guilt of surviving something that wasn't supposed to be survived. You carry it like extra weight. You get used to it. You don't put it down. Level 7. The weight. There's a version of this story where making it feels like freedom, and it does. Genuinely. You can say yes to things you spent years saying no to. You can go to sleep without the background radiation of financial dread that hummed beneath everything for so long you stopped noticing it until it went quiet. You can help people, really help them, not just with advice and intention, but with actual resources, which is the only kind of help that changes things. You can give your kids a start that is fundamentally different from the one you were given, and that specific thing is worth every year of the grind, every loss, every 3 a.m. moment, every sacrifice. That part is real. But there's a weight that comes with it, that freedom doesn't cancel out. You are the first. That means you have no map. No one in your family can tell you how to hold this, how to pass it on, how to make sure it outlasts you. The wealth stops at one generation unless you build the architecture to carry it forward, and nobody taught you architecture. You're building the blueprint and living in the building at the same time. You think about your kids, or you think about the kids you'll have, if you don't have them yet. You think about what you want to give them and what you don't want to give them. You want to give them security. You don't want to give them the version of security that becomes its own kind of prison, the kind that removes all friction, all hunger, all understanding of what things cost. You want them to have the foundation without losing the fire. You don't know how to do that yet. You're figuring it out in real time, the way you've figured out everything. Your family looks at you differently now. There's pride in it, genuine, chest-swelling pride that moves you every time you see it. But there's also something else. A subtle shift in the dynamic that nobody asked for and nobody wanted, but that happened anyway. The way all the changes happened quietly, irreversibly, without an announcement. You become the one they call. Not just for the financial questions, for everything. Advice, decisions, problems. You are, somehow, the authority now, which is both a strange gift and an impossible responsibility, because you're still figuring yourself out. You're still new at this. You just look stable from the outside. And in the rare moments when you're completely still early morning, before the day has demands, when the world is quiet enough to hear yourself think you feel something that doesn't have a clean name, it's not regret. It's not loneliness. It's not pride. It's something like weight. The weight of being the one who made it. The weight of a family tree that stops bending under a specific kind of pressure the moment it reaches you. The weight of knowing that everything you build now echoes forward, not just through your own life, but through lives that don't exist yet. Children and grandchildren who will inherit not just money, but the shape of what's possible. The dimensions of the ceiling. The size of the room they're allowed to imagine themselves in. You change that. The coffee can is gone. In its place, accounts with numbers your grandmother couldn't have imagined, structures your father never knew existed, options your mother was never supposed to have. You didn't just cross a finish line. You moved one. And now, you carry that. Every day. Not as a burden, exactly, as a responsibility that you didn't ask for and wouldn't give back if you could. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about being the first. You don't just break the ceiling for yourself. You remove it entirely for everyone who comes after you. They'll never know it was there. They'll look up and see open sky and assume that's just what sky looks like. Unlimited, obvious, available. They won't know about the years you stared at the underside of something most people in your family never thought to question. They won't know about the 3 a.m. moments. The failed attempts. The specific loneliness of a milestone with no reference point. The dinner conversations where you couldn't explain what you were carrying. They won't know. And that's exactly right. That's the whole point. You didn't do this for a trophy. You didn't do this for recognition or validation or a version of yourself that can say, I told you so. You did this so the next one doesn't have to start where you started. That's what generational wealth actually is. It's not a number. It's a different starting line. You built it. Out of nothing. Out of a coffee can and a tight jaw and a family that loved you inside the only walls they knew how to build. You took the invisible ceiling and made it the floor. The view from here is nothing like you imagined. It's heavier, quieter, more real. And you wouldn't trade it for any version of easier. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next.